West Virginia Predator. In 2010, I moved to Ohio from the Gulf Coast to attend a nationally renowned trade school. I wanted to change careers, and this school was super affordable and legit. The area of the state was known as the Armpit of Ohio. It closely bordered West Virginia. Poverty rates were high, hardly any economy. This trade school was a bit of a diamond in the rough and attracted students from all over the nation. In my trade school program, we would work at a field site once a semester. The very first field school was on a property in a small town in West Virginia. The property butted up against another person's backyard and home. As you enter the town, there's a welcome sign, as well as a sign that says it's the birthplace of a certain mega famous country singer. The first day, I noticed a man watching us work from the adjoining property. Just a curious neighbor, retired probably. The next day he returns and starts trying to engage us and our teacher. Little comments here and there. One day, he even takes it upon himself to walk over and give a little teaching lesson himself. He corrects the way I'm using a tool. At lunch that day, one of my classmates mentions the annoying spectator man and how our teacher needed to tell him to leave us alone. I thought it was kind of funny, and we carried on for a couple more days. On our last day, as we are packing our things up and saying farewell to our successfully completed project, the man approaches me and asks me in a very friendly tone if I want to see his wood shop real quick. The rest of the students are leaving. I kind of rolled my eyes internally, thinking this man just wants to show off or something like that. At the time of my life, I was also a bit naive and way too polite, so I said, okay. The man shows me his wood shop, nothing off or strange about it. Then he asked me if I wanted to see the inside of his house, which was attached. He mentioned that he had built it himself. Uninterested, I said, okay. Inside, the ceilings were extremely vaulted. He told me how the timbers were hand-hewn. I looked around, politely nodding. But then he asked me if I wanted to see his antique toy collection. I didn't really know what he meant by toy. Uninterested and somewhat suspicious at this point, I say, okay. He leads me to a door and opens it, revealing a dimly lit, carpeted stairway going down into a basement. The walls are brown paneling, and as I walk down the steps behind him, I see a large cardboard cutout of previously mentioned mega famous country music star hanging on the wall. The bottom of the stairwell opens to a very large room, very dimly lit. Around the perimeter of the room are waist-high glass cabinets, much like you see at a jewelry store. The lighting in these glass cabinets is dim ambers and pinks. Inside the cabinets are hundreds of vintage children's toys. He then leads me to another door, opens it, bright fluorescent lighting. As I enter, I look around and there are hundreds of photos and news clippings and memorabilia of aforementioned country music star, even him as a little boy, a teenager. One photo shows him and a bunch of other boys in a hot tub. I learned that the man was very close to his family growing up. He took the photo of the hot tub party. The room is in a shrine, a museum of the past, his rise to fame. He points to one photo of the guy at the Grand Ole Opry. He's standing next to the banjo legend Grandpa Jones, and I noticed that vintage toy man is also in the photo. He describes the moment the photo was taken, how Grandpa Jones had reached over and pinched him in the right butt as the photo was taken, but as he recounts the events, he pinches me in the butt and giggles. It felt like a sleight of hand. I didn't see it coming. By now, I know that something is deeply wrong, but I don't show it. I laugh it off. But he continues on his house tour. He leads me to another door. I probably stopped breathing. It was just a sterile room with 3 massage tables. They were upholstered in a sick-looking green leather. I forget what he told me. Then he gives me a long run-over of his toy collection, and even makes sure to hand me a pornography book from around the 30s. People weren't as prude back then as you'd think. Again, I'm just smiling and nodding. I pulled up my acting training. Really, I'm pulling over a full body mask. Maybe I learned it years ago. Maybe it was hardwired into my biology. Whatever the case, my one and only goal is to get out of his house safe and sound. I express no desire to run or any indication of fear. I pretend he's the grandfather I never had, but he indicates that the tour is over and starts to move things back upstairs. I get to the stairs first and have to walk up with him behind me. I was agonizing having to just free fall into that situation and just not run up in a panic like you would if you're home alone and leaving a dark basement. I took intentional, moderately paced steps, not too fast and not too slow. At his back door, the sun is bright. I can see my car way off next door in the field. He reaches over and squeezes my shoulder, saying he wants to get a beer sometime. This man is probably in his 60s. I was 25, male. He asked for my number, and I give him a fake one. I pretend to find him endearing. I just wanted to get out. I drove home in a cold daze. My brain just frozen. I couldn't shake that feeling for weeks. The Shoe Cabin. Once, when I was around 15 years old, my family took a trip to Tennessee. We were with another family who wanted to go tubing, so we did. It was a hot day, so the water was nice and it was altogether relaxing. Not far into our 7-mile trip, I got separated from the rest of my group. I wasn't too concerned, especially when a boy my age floated up next to me and began making small talk. Seeing as I had no one else to stick with or talk to, I stayed with him. Hey, see that cabin up there? He lived nearby the water and knew all sorts of things about the surroundings. I indeed saw the cabin in question, and he proceeded to tell me about it. Apparently, every time people lose their shoes in the river, they end up hung up on it and around this abandoned cabin next to the river. I assume it's a well-known practice, but that sort of thing just weirds me out. The guy eventually reached to stop and we said our goodbyes, and I was suddenly alone. Further down the river, I saw a man sitting on the bank in a lawn chair surrounded by shoes and children's items. He had a child's fishing pole in his hand. After hearing the story about the shoe cabin, this really creeped me out. Didn't help that he had the most shit-eating grin aimed at me that I'd ever seen. So, shoe guy on the river, let's not meet. Creepy kid grabs my... When I was about 15, this happened. Year 2010, I think it was. Also, English is not my first language. I was around 6 or maybe 7 in the evening, and it's quite dark already in the Philippines, leaving you with only street lights and dim shadows being cast from the lights inside the houses. Plus, there's this one particular street in our area, which is so narrow and 2 consecutive streetlights are not working. So if you walk there, you'd have to walk for a good 1 to 2 minutes in complete darkness. Enough with the intro. That one night I was asked to run some errands, like buy something, because there were visitors in the house. I was given P500, which is a pretty large amount for a 15-year-old to have at the time. It's around $10 in US. And also that time, I recently got a new phone, which I was so overly fascinated about. So when I went out, I brought my phone with me. In our place, robbery is not really a thing, so it wasn't a big deal, but all in all, when I started walking along the aforementioned dark street, I got a bit nervous. I reached the store with no incident, but the thing I was told to buy wasn't available, so I went back immediately. When I was nearing the spot with no working street light, I saw a silhouette of a small kid leaning facing towards a wall. Peeing in the streets is pretty common here, so I thought he was doing just that. Although what I find creepy was why in that specific spot with no lights. I shrugged it off and continued walking. The nearer I got, the more I became aware of the fact that I was holding my new phone plus a P500 bill. Even so, I just calmly walked and held the money and my phone tightly pressed together between my hands. When I passed by the kid, I got away for a good 2 to 3 meters when he suddenly jumped at me from behind my back and hugged me, locking both my arms to my side so I cannot move. The first thing on my mind was to secure the money in the phone. He then tried to put his hands in front of me and grab my V word. Yes, you read that right. My private female part. He tried to grab it. But since my hands were in front of me, locked together, securing my phone and money, it was kind of making it hard for him to do just that. So he just managed to brush it off with his hands. When he realized he can't do that, he resorted to grab my boobs instead. I wasn't able to stop him at all, as it happened too fast, and my mind was a little too preoccupied with protecting my possessions at that time, that by the time I realized what was happening, he was already sprinting off towards the opposite direction from which I came. I stood shocked for less than a minute, then I too ran back home. I didn't think of telling my mom about it. I mean, he was a kid, a couple inches shorter than me. Around 10 to 12 years old, I think. Nonetheless, creepy kid. Let's not meet. Stalker caused me to drop out of school. Right after I graduated high school, I went to our community college, where my best friend at the time and her boyfriend also attended, along with a lot of their friends who I became acquainted with as well. Fast forward to Halloween of 2010. We took my best friend's little sister and brother out trick-or-treating, where her boyfriend ended up joining us. We were towards the end of the routes when one of their friends from the college ended up joining us, which I didn't think anything about at the time, other than he gave me weird vibes. After we were done trick-or-treating, we brought the kids home to go to bed, but my friends wanted to do something to keep the night going, since it was Halloween and in a college town. That's an excuse to party, just like any other day. They decided to go downtown, but I declined since I wasn't feeling well and went home. A few hours later, I was in bed reading a book, and my phone lit up from a number I did not recognize. It was a friend that joined us while trick-or-treating. He explained that he got my number from my best friend's boyfriend, and he was concerned that I didn't feel well and insisted on bringing me soup to feel better. Some sort of red flag went off in my head, and I didn't want this guy to know where I lived, so I said no. My mom was taking care of it, but thank you anyways. He got a little pushy, but eventually backed down and proceeded to send me many texts about how much fun he had when we were out and blah blah blah. He then added me to Facebook, went through all of my pictures and liked all of them. Being the naive 18-year-old I was, I thought he was just being overly friendly and just a little weird, so I didn't avoid him or anything at school since we hung out with the same people anyways. One day when we didn't have school, he texted me asking if I wanted to go to lunch, and I accepted, thinking I was getting a free meal out of the deal since he insisted on paying and it would be a quick visit. We met at the restaurant and sat down and talked and ate. It was super awkward, and then I stupidly mentioned I wanted to go to the mall to get stuff. He insisted on driving me there and that his mom can move to the back seat. Wait, what? He apparently drove his mom's minivan, brought her with him, and left her in the car while we went on our date. I kept saying that she should come in and join us, and he got really weird about it and said she was napping and she didn't mind waiting. At that point, I started getting very uncomfortable. Luckily, we were done with our food, and I said I needed to leave, thanked him for the food, and got up to go. He kept saying he'll meet me at the mall, and I was put in what felt like a weird position and am not an assertive person, so I reluctantly said okay. We meet at a large store connected to the mall, and I mentioned how I was here to look for a new scarf and started browsing. He picked out the most expensive one he could find and brought it for me and basically almost threatened me not to return it. It was then I wanted to be left alone, so I said thank you, and I was going to go home now. He insisted on walking me out to my car, and I kept saying it was okay, I was fine. He was a big guy, and even simple walking caused him to break out in a sweat, but he wouldn't take no for an answer, so away we went. We passed by another and took a quick peek inside. There were a pair of boots that I very quickly, in passing, mentioned they were cute, but I don't know if I'd wear them. He brought them for me and did the same somewhat threat not to return them because they were gifts. And you don't return gifts, like, dude, then what are gift receipts for? At that point, I got a little firm and told him I wanted time alone, so please don't walk me out to my car. He accepted and went his merry way, clearly happy that he made those purchases to show me he liked me. I go out to my car and wait for probably about 20 minutes. I see what his van looked like at this point, and kept my eye out for it, in case he was going to follow me home, but didn't see anything. I actually ended up going back to the mall and returned the boots and scarf. In reality, I didn't want either of them, and I was way too uncomfortable accepting those gifts from a strange person. I don't like owing people, and I had a feeling he was going to use that as some sort of leverage to get something from me. I took the long way home to make sure I wasn't being followed, and told my mom about what happened. She was concerned, and I thought it was strange as well, since he and I don't really know each other, and it seemed like a weird act of desperation. I got a text from him a few hours later, saying he hoped I liked his gifts. I responded, saying that I returned them because I wasn't comfortable with it and he lost it. My phone kept lighting up with tons of texts, and he was livid that I did such a disrespectful thing. I should be thankful he got those for me, so I got angry and told him I didn't ask him to get the gifts. He basically threatened me to keep them, and he didn't take no for an answer when I told him I didn't want them, so essentially, he was the one who disrespected me. He backed down a lot then. I told him to stop texting me and leave me alone. I got a few more texts, but eventually he stopped. It was weird at school, because I kind of avoided being around my friends when I knew he was there. I still hung out with some of them alone, like my best friend, but when I knew a friend gathering was going on, I wouldn't go. They understood. Now this is where I got stupid. I am a very, very compassionate person, and 9 out of 10 times I feel horrible for when I was mean to someone, even in this instance. I ended up texting the creeper one night, apologizing for how rude I was to him, and he said he understood where I was coming from, and we had a normal conversation for a little bit until I fell asleep at around 11 p.m. I know this because I woke up at 2 a.m., looked at my phone, and saw the last text I sent him was a little before 11, stating I was tired. After I fell asleep, he sent me one text, saw I didn't respond, texted again, saw I didn't respond, kept texting. Called me from his cell phone about 10 times, called me from another number about 15 times because he thought I was ignoring him, and then sent one last threatening message, if you don't respond within a half hour, I'm calling the police. I happened to wake up at 2 a.m., which was an hour after he sent that text, and flipped the fuck out, texting him that I fell asleep, and he better have not called the cops. You know to why he called the police? Because he interpreted me saying I was tired as I was tired of living. He thought I killed myself. Never mind that it was, basically bedtime when he and I were talking. So yes, me killing myself is the most logical route to take here in this whole entire situation. I ran to my mom's room, told her what happened, and she goes, for crying out loud, they have better things to do with their time. They aren't coming to check on ya. I go back into my room, which looked out onto our driveway, looked out the window, see a cop car parked on the street, and 2 flashlights walking up the drive. They knock on the door, I opened it, and I'm pretty sure the look on my face told them everything. Yes, Sally? Yep. You know why we're here? Yep. So what happened? I fell asleep. The police understood and actually called the creep back and told him to leave me the fuck alone, just as I was texting him to leave me the fuck alone. He then had the gall to ask me for my address again, to come over and apologize to me, and that he loved me. I told him he doesn't even know me, and he had absolutely no reason to be in love with me. His reasoning was that's how he worked. He fell in love first, and then decided if it was the right person or not. Dude was loony. This put a big strain on my friendships at the college. His story was so much more twisted and painted me as the bad guy, and I ended up making a lot of enemies, even with my best friend, because he labeled me as a whore, and everyone believed him. I had to drop out of school because that circle of friends was so big, and whenever the creep saw me, he would get irrationally angry, and his friends had to physically hold him back, which was a lot of people, because he was massive. I have since cut contact with all of them, and ended up going to a different school that I love so much more, and am in a much better place without all of them in my life. So, creep from school, I hope I never have to see you again. Grave robbing an infant? I hope I never meet you again. Let me start off by saying that as I write this, it's late at night. I just got off working a long night, and I have a couple of drinks, so I'm ready to relay the creepiest story that's ever happened to me to the best of my abilities. A few years ago, I don't remember how many now, let's just say I was in my early 20s, so that would put the story around 2010, I was camping with some friends in the Charles C. Dean Wilderness in the Hoosier National Forest. The main road in the wilderness is called Tower Ridge Road, after the tall Hickory Ridge Fire Tower that is smack dab in the middle of the woods. When you pull off of the road into the parking area for the tower, there's an old disused gravel road which leads to a few trails out into the wilderness. At the very end of the road is a very old cemetery. A lot of the headstones are simple sandstone markers, indicating that someone is buried there. If there was any information on them to begin with, it had long since eroded away. The area that made up the wilderness was created when the government repressed farmers' land during the Great Depression. Before that, the area was farmed for quite a while. So naturally, the poor substances farming people that lived and farmed the area needed a place to bury their loved ones. Most of the graves in the cemetery were very old, and all their immediate relatives had long since passed away themselves. However, there were a few granite headstones from as early as the mid-1990s, and a few from wealthier former residences who were able to afford professionally carved headstones dating from the early 20th century. I was camping in a convenient area with close proximity to our vehicle and the gravel road to make our camping trip all the more comfortable. The only downside to having all these conveniences was that we had to be near the main trail, so we had a fair amount of foot traffic going by our tents. My friends and myself were friendly to everyone passing by, exchanging pleasantries and wishing people a good hike. Quite a while after dark had settled in, We had our fire roaring, and were all in good spirits after having had some drinks and smoking some pots. A person of average build and weight passed our camp wearing a headlamp with a creepy red filter on, so we couldn't see his face, and he was carrying a spade with a D-grip. We said hello like we had to everybody that passed our camp, but this person was different. This person just passed on by without breaking his stride or saying a word to us. He just acted like we weren't even there. We all thought this was weird, but nobody said anything to each other, and we soon forgot about our encounter with a weird shovel-wielding man. The next morning I awoke to a beautiful blue sky. The birds were singing, and it was shaping out to be a truly beautiful day. I woke up before my compatriots, which wasn't unusual for me. I'm always the first one up in the morning on camping trips. I usually get coffee ready and wake everyone up with the sounds and smells of coffee being made. On this particular trip, being a bunch of 20-year-olds who remembered the booze and weed, but of course forgot the coffee. After standing around for a while and not wanting to wake my friends, I decided to take the mile or so hike down the disused gravel road and check out the cemetery. I left without telling anyone where I was going. After all, it was a beautiful day, not too hot, not too cold, the sun was shining. What could possibly go wrong, right? I had soon made the mile or so trek down the gravel road, enjoying the sights and smells of the forest, and I quickly found the cemetery. It was surrounded by a waist-high chain-link fence with a gate in it. I opened the gate and stepped inside the cemetery and began looking at the graves. Near the entrance to the cemetery, there were a few professionally carved limestone headstones. As I approached the closest one, to my horror, I saw that the grave had been disturbed. There was an approximately 5-foot hole dug near the headstone with the same D-grip shovel in the bottom of the hole, which was located in the approximate location where the person had been buried. The hole had like 3 terrace-like steps dug into it, so the grave robber could easily get out of their own hole when they were done doing their dastardly deed. I inspected the headstone as best as I could under the circumstances. It was limestone and very old, so a lot of information had long since eroded away. However, I'm fairly certain that the grace belonged to what I think is an infant girl named Elizabeth, who died shortly after her birth in the early 20th century. After my brief inspection, the notion dawned on me that there was only one way in and out of the cemetery, and I hadn't passed anyone on my way in. I wasn't trying to be stealthy in my approach, and I soon realized that the person who dug the hole probably heard me coming, and was probably still in the immediate area. All of a sudden, I had the feeling that I was being watched from somewhere in the surrounding forest, and needless to say, I felt very unnerved by the whole situation. I looked around, but I saw nothing but the endless forest on either side of me. I decided to beat a hasty retreat from the area. After I got out of earshot of the cemetery, I walked as fast as I could back to the relative safety of our camp. A little while after I got back to camp, my friends started waking up, and naturally I relayed what happened to them. They were just as freaked out by the whole situation that I was, and after some discussion we decided to leave. After we had packed up camp and were about to leave the parking area, we noticed that there was a sign on the gate of the gravel road going to the cemetery indicating a number for whoever managed the cemetery. Of course we called the number, and I relayed the story of whomever was on the other end. A few hours after this, I received a call from the Lawrence County Sheriff's Office asking for my story. They said they would send an officer to check out the cemetery. Needless to say, I never heard back from them, but I sure as hell hope that I never run into the D-shovel-wielding weirdo who dug up an infant's grave in the middle of the night.